my pleasure to introduce our very special guest, Missouri Vaun. Missouri Vaun is a two-time Golden Crown Literary Society award-winning lesbian romance writer published by Bold Strokes Books. Vaughn spent a large part of her childhood in southern Mississippi before attending high school in North Carolina and college in Tennessee. Strong connections to her roots in the rural South have been a grounding force throughout her life. Vaughn spent 12 years finding her voice working as a journalist in places as disparate as Chicago, Atlanta, and Jackson, Mississippi, all along filing away characters in their stories. Her novels are heartfelt, earthy, speak of loyalty and our responsibility to others. She and her wife live in Northern California. In her latest book, The Mandolin Lunch, Vaughn poses the question, can a cavalier art teacher and a meticulous music teacher find love? And I like to say, Missouri Vaun writes nice books about nice people being nice to each other. And though, of course, this isn't the case for all situations in all of her books, kindness and love always do win out in the end. That being said, tonight, I'm excited to introduce Missouri Vaun to all of you. Welcome, Missouri.
Thank you so much for that nice introduction. It is really nice that, I guess nice, I'm saying nice because you said nice, but if the takeaway is that the books are about nice people being nice to each other, then that makes me feel really good because that is sort of my goal. I mean, these stories, romance, should make you feel good, right? It should make you feel happy when you read them. The backstory for The Mandolin Lunch, which is the book we're talking about tonight, I can't tell if I'm big on the screen or small or if the thing is reversed, but this started with a dinner with a friend of mine who's a musician. I don't know if there are other writers listening in or readers who have musical playlists that you listen to when you read or write, but I have very specific playlists for when I write. It's almost like a soundtrack to a movie. And one of the bands that I listen to is a San Francisco Bay Area band called Blame Sally. They recently, like during the pandemic, I think was their final tour, but they were around for a long time. They do great stuff. And one of the members of the band, Renee Harcourt, we were having dinner with her and her wife, and they started telling, we're like, how did you guys meet? They start telling the story about how they met because of a mandolin, because Renee was getting a mandolin repaired, and the music repair shop was across the street from a favorite cafe in the Bay Area, and she and Karen ended up bumping into each other. And then we started jokingly saying, oh, so it was the Mandolin Lunch. That's how you guys met, the Mandolin Lunch. And I was like, all right, I have to steal that for a book title. Not only that, just the encounter in a music store seemed kind of unique. So then I got the idea to throw an art teacher and a music teacher together. Sort of the punchline is that the art teacher is not really an art teacher. She does children's book illustration, which I also do in my day job. That's sort of my other life. So if any of you do that or are familiar with that, you know, you're doing a lot of work, but the income is incremental because you only get paid when you deliver a segment of the work. And so the character Garrett in this story, who's the illustrator, decides, oh, this would be an easy way to make steady cash while I'm working on the story. I'll go to this rural school and I'll be a substitute teacher. I mistakenly had that idea one time. Substitute teaching is not for the weak of heart, or for the inexperienced teacher, I would say, because the kids just like walked all over me. So basically all I did was channel my own experiences of Garrett in this classroom of trying to be a substitute teacher for somebody who was on maternity leave. So basically you throw these two characters into a room. They have to share a classroom because it's a small rural school. So music and art alternate. And for 3 months, they're thrown in this together. And not only that, they have to produce a children's play, a stage production about the Wizard of Oz at the end of the school year. So anyway, it was just a great opportunity for a lot of elements of the story about art, what makes art art, different genres of art, like being a storybook illustrator versus a painter, the musician in the story. She actually thinks about music in terms of color. So the two of them had this sort of overlap where when they were talking about each artistic pursuit that they do, they could meet sort of in the middle when they talked about color. I've had other friends, musicians, who tell me that they think about music that way. So I thought that was a nice overlap. I don't know. So that's how the Mandolin Lunch came about. I always say the best stories have a solid footprint in reality, right? Because sometimes the truth is just so specific and so unique that fiction can't top it. So I usually like integrate things from actual life into the stories, even though obviously they're fiction. So that's my intro. I don't know if you have questions or if anybody listening has questions. I don't think I see anything in the chat yet.
I have some questions prepared for you, but I want to welcome everyone to throw your questions or comments into the chat, and we will get to as many as possible during our time. So, Missouri, one question that I'm really curious about is, how did you decide romance was your genre?
It was accidental. Actually, I started writing science fiction. But then what happened was, even in science fiction and sort of adventure stories, I was most interested in how characters found each other and how they fell in love. And so this editor I was working with said, why don't you try writing a contemporary romance? Because those are really popular, it'd be a different, more people read those than read science fiction, apparently. So that's sort of how it happened. It was sort of accidental. I wouldn't have thought that romance would be my thing, but I do like introducing people to each other and then helping them fall in love is kind of a fun thing. Plus, I just like happy endings. So you always get a happy ending in a romance novel, or you should.
That is so true. And I love that about romance novels. I'll be honest, your novels were the first romance novels that I ever read. And
oh, wow, thank you.
Yeah. So it's nice that you introduced me to the whole genre. So I do like that happiness at the end.
Yeah. There's just so much, there's enough stress in the world, you know what I mean? Like, you should be able to have a little bit of that warm hug of a book, that feel good from characters finding each other. And it almost feels like I don't know how you feel, but when I read a book, a romance novel, you feel like you've expanded your friend circle. Like, that's the ultimate goal, right? That you feel like you really have become friends with these people and you're invested in their lives. But it also just, it's comforting, I think, to be part of somebody else's world for a little while.
And you said in your intro to the Mandolin Lunch that you thought that it was a story for this time, what we're going through right now.
Yeah, I guess I think I wanted it to be just, I guess I worked extra hard to make it be comforting. Small town, close-knit family, supportive parents, supportive neighbors. You know what I mean? It was sort of like a group hug, the whole thing. Even the principal, who's kind of like clueless and hapless, was a nice guy.
That's true. I appreciated that. Yeah. I want to remind everybody that we do have the chat open. So any questions or comments that you might have are very welcome. um, while everybody's getting their thoughts together. There's a comment in the chat. Okay, well, everybody's getting their questions together. I'm curious about your next project, what you're working on next.
So the next project is well, actually, the next book coming out is called Slow Burn, which is either the cheesiest title for a romance novel or the most genius title for a romance novel. And I can't take credit for it. My editor thought of it. But I was like, yeah, that's actually a great title. And it's about because I live now in Northern California, and we've had so many fires, so many really horrible fires, and fire season has become this moment in the year in the autumn where every time you smell smoke, you have sort of like a fear reaction to it. So anyway, this story, Slow Burn, is about a wildland firefighter who has a harrowing experience and has to sort of disengage from that and retreats back to her sort of the place where she grew up, which is in Western North Carolina, in the mountains where everything's green and there's plenty of water, and they don't have a fire season and they rarely have big fires. Although Gatlinburg did have a fire, a few years ago. But anyway, that came about because my wife and I were evacuating in 2019, I think it was. Maybe it was 2020. All the years are blending together, but we actually got trapped on I-80, which is an enormous freeway between the Bay Area and Tahoe. We were trying to leave California to drive to my folks' place in Georgia. And we got these two fires decided to merge and they closed down I-80 when we were driving through. It was the scariest experience of my entire life. We had our whole family, all our dogs, our cat, everybody was in the cars together. And we were actually in two separate cars because we were going to leave a car with friends in Sacramento so it didn't get burned up, Anyway, all of a sudden, if you can imagine, it was like an apocalyptic moment. We're on this 8-lane highway. So there's like 4 lanes going east and 4 lanes going west. And all of a sudden we see this smoke and we're like, well, it could be far away. We don't know what it is. Suddenly no one is coming westbound. There's no cars. And we're like, oh shit. And we're in like bumper to bumper, like bottleneck traffic on the right-hand side. And it was because they had closed 80. The fire had jumped the freeway and they were diverting people off, but we didn't know because we were stuck in traffic. Anyway, that was the starting point for this book. I was like, I really want to write about what it's like to be a firefighter, what it's like to experience these wildfires. And it was a good emotional exercise to sort of channel that fear into this character as I was writing the book. So that's the next one, which is a little bit, hopefully ends up in the same happy place because it is ultimately a romance novel. She is not looking for love, but obviously finds it when she gets to North Carolina and meets someone else not looking for love. But it's another small town romance. I think I really like small town romances because that's how I grew up, and it's just fun to sort of create that world for characters.
Well, I am already excited about this book. It sounds fantastic. It sounds like edge of your seat, plus love. So that's great. Yeah.
I like love with a little bit of adventure thrown in,
Yeah. That's always fun.
Yeah.
And in the chat, I saw that somebody mentioned it is a great title. So.
Slow burn. Okay, I'll tell my editor.
Yeah. So I'm curious about, you explained that the experience with the wildfire, which sounds absolutely harrowing, that informed this most recent book. And I'm curious about how your other life experiences have informed your writing.
Oh, I definitely pull from my own experiences for secondary characters sometimes, and for just jumping off places with stories. I have quite a few books that are set either in the mountains of North Georgia or Western North Carolina, which is my mom's whole family's from North Georgia in the mountains. And I kind of just remember my youth visiting my grandparents in that area, and how I love that part of the country. And then I went to high school in Brevard, North Carolina, which is in Western Carolina. And so that whole region right there is just has been a lot of inspiration for storytelling. I'm always on the lookout for a good location. And for the Mandolin Lunch, the location that I had in mind was this little town on the border of North Carolina and Georgia that I drove through called Dillsboro. I don't know if anybody listening has been there, but it's this quaint, picturesque little speck of a town right on this river. And I even got like the city map from like a coffee shop, and I was like, oh my God, I got to set a movie here. It's sort of like scouting for a movie location is what I meant. And then I said, I have to set a book here. But this very similar, like staging and figuring out your environment for a book is probably the same for a movie. But anyway, Dillsboro was the inspiration for the little town that she goes to teach school in.
It's such a cute town. Not Dillsboro, I've never been there, but the Mandolin Lunch town is, so everybody's so sweet. It's such a nice little town.
That was our experience. We stopped through there on the way to somewhere, and I was just like, everybody's so nice. Like, we went to the coffee shop, we went to a chocolate shop, we went to this antique store. There was like a microbrewery, and I was like, I love this place. And seriously, it's like 4 blocks, of town. Yeah.
That's a cool little town. That's got everything. It's got everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so everybody throw some questions in the chat here. And you may have seen that we put in the link to the Pyramid books, where they are offering 5% off all of the Writers Live titles, the Mandolin Lunch included. And I believe it's 10% goes back to the Friends of the Palm Beach County Library. So we'd love to hear what thoughts and questions you all have.
I wonder if anybody listening has if they have in their mind a romance or a story that they'd love to read but they haven't seen. I'm always looking for unique pairings, or unique environments. If anybody has any ideas to throw out, that's always fun to hear from readers. I'll tell you, while we're waiting, somebody's asking if I have books on audio. I do have a few of my titles on audio. This one is not on audio yet. Sometimes it takes a while for the audio book to catch up with the, paperback release. The book that's coming up after Slow Burn is a historical fiction book called
America.
Forever's Promise. In case anybody's interested in historical fiction. I actually like to write those too, because it forces you to really slow down and be in a different headspace, not in our modern age. Relationships move slower, things reveal themselves slower. Weather's more of a factor. There's just lots of things that happen in historical fiction, especially if it's on the frontier, and especially for women on the frontier. So That's the book after Slow Burn. Sorry, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I was muted. I said you have it all planned out, and that's great with the upcoming books.
Yeah. It's good to keep a few, out in the pipeline, I think. So you can be thinking about them.
And for the person who asked if you have audiobooks, the Palm Beach County Library System on Cloud Library does not have any audiobooks, but we do have the Mandolin Lunch as an ebook. So you can check that out on Cloud Library. And my colleague had a question for you about racial social justice issues in the South, since your books are set in the South, and if that's a issue that you've addressed in any of your novels so far.
Not really. I did have a book that was set in Georgia in the 30s that did deal with some of that, just because one of the main characters had a close, her family and an African American family were close, and there were some I don't want to spoil the book. Some stuff happened, and the main character, went to bat for this other character. But, my editor has said that I should be cautious. She said that my books that are set in the South should come with a warning label a little bit, because they don't deal with some of the more complicated, maybe unfriendly aspects of the South sometimes. Like, I don't really get into, there aren't a lot of triggers in the book. There's not a lot of homophobia, which if you lived in a rural area in the South, you might encounter today. That's, I don't deal with a lot of racial conflict either. I've sort of just decided to create the world I wish existed in these books. And so that's what they're like. I know there's a name in fiction for that, where you really fictionalize utopia, but I can't think of it off the top of my head.
I read that book, Whiskey Sunrise.
Yes,
right?
That's the one. Yeah.
It's
been a while since I thought about that book. That was because my great granddad was a moonshiner and a Church of God minister, and that was kind of, a lot of it was based on family history. And there's a lot in that book about coming out as a lesbian if you have a very religious family, which I did. A lot of the conversations between that main character and her father were basically me and my mom. I mean, so many of those conversations about the Bible and church and expectations. And yeah, it's the only book I've written that my mom read. I took the romance scenes out of it, and I gave her a slightly edited G-rated version because it is my mom and she doesn't need to read that. Anyway, she really liked it. She said she really enjoyed it. So that was a high compliment coming from her. She does not read romance novels, and definitely not lesbian romance novels.
Yeah, it felt very authentic. So it seemed, very true to real life experience. So yeah. I'm not surprised to hear that it came from real life experience.
Yeah.
And, I want to check in now and see, does anybody have any other questions? What would you like for Missouri to tell you about? You have this opportunity now to ask a real life romance novelist any questions you might have. So in the meantime, while people are thinking, I would love to know what the last book you personally read was that you couldn't put down.
It was actually a nonfiction book called In the Kingdom of Ice by Hampton Sides. I really love nonfiction, and I was on this kick of reading all these Arctic exploration books. Um, the one I read before that was called Icebound, which was really good, and it was written by a woman. What was her name? Oh, Andrea Pitzer. I wrote her name down. But in the Kingdom of Ice, I think the reason I liked it so much is because this is actually funny to think about it now, because the writer drew heavily on correspondence between the captain of the ship and his wife, even though once he left for this Arctic trip, neither one got each other's letters. But right, because like she was writing them and sending them to where she hoped he would be, in hopes that he would get them. And sometimes she would make duplicate copies of the letters and send them off. Anyway, I became so invested in all the characters in this book. But in addition to, it has all the great stuff of an Arctic exploration, you know, shipwrecks and polar bears and, you know, crazy, crazy hardships. But on top of that, it has a huge swath of just American history. The big Chicago World's Fair where Edison was there and the gas engine was first revealed, and the competing newspaper industries in New York. It's just like, it's like a who's who book, that kind of thing. Anyway, really, really enjoyed that book. In the Kingdom of Ice. I recommend it. I actually just bought it for my dad because I thought he would really like it. But something about having the incorporation of the personal letters made the characters seem more real, I think. Like yeah, you realize like, oh, these guys, they were super brave and they're risking their lives, but yeah, they were also risking their like heart and their home and their families, and you know, it just makes it all seem so much more immediate, I guess, having the personal letters.
Do you know who the author is?
Yeah, Hampton Sides.
Hampton
Hampton
Side?
Sides. Yeah.
Okay. We'll
Yeah,
have
I
to
can
check
put it in
and
the
see if we have it in the library. Yeah, put it in the chat. That would be great.
Hampton Sides. I hope I'm spelling it right. In the Kingdom of Ice.
Thank you so much for the recommendation.
Yeah, very, very good. I should give a shout out to my the person I stole my pen name from. Because Missouri Vaun is a pen name. And it was my great grandmother's name. She was a Creek Indian from South Georgia, and I did meet her when I was a very wee child. She passed away unfortunately when I was 3 or 4. So I have photos with her, and I have like her spectacle case, and I have her old typewriter from the turn of the century. But I always thought Missouri Vaun was the coolest name, and that if I ever had a chance to have a pen name, that I was gonna swipe it. So I hope wherever my great grandma is, she's happy with that decision. She's writing books from the grave.
Do you think you became an author just so you could have a pen name
Maybe.
and use that?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
So do we have, okay, we have 2 things that you put in there. And we have some other events coming up and some friends of the PBC library, 2 links that are in the chat right now. And who else has questions or comments for Missouri Vaun?
A very shy bunch today.
Yeah. This
I
is
was
a great
gonna
opportunity.
I was gonna say, you know, one of the reasons I started, you're saying, you know, maybe I wanted to become a writer so I could use the pen name, which is true. But it's also true that the character, you know, in this book, The Mandolin Lunch, is a book illustrator, and that's what I do as my real job, my sort of day job. And so I had this like suitcase of ideas for graphic novels that I never got around to illustrating because they're so time consuming. And at the time, I had a full time job and everything. So I just thought, what if I tried to write these graphic novel ideas as a prose novel and see how they turn out, you know? It was a very interesting switch to write a novel versus to write a graphic novel, because in a graphic novel, which is essentially a comic book, right? Everybody gets a point of view. If you have a word balloon, you get a point of view. But in a prose novel, you have to be very selective about who gets a point of view. And then the part of the story that's revealed through their point of view can only be what they know. It's not the same sort of all knowing, everybody sees everything, you know, like you get in a graphic novel. Additionally, emotions that are maybe easier to draw are really hard to explain with words sometimes. So it was really a great uh, muscle building exercise to switch gears and try to write everything I would normally draw. And sometimes when I'm writing a scene, I have to sit and think about how I would draw it to figure out how to describe it in text. Like, what does the lighting look like? What colors in the sky? Are patterns of shadow changing as the wind blows through the trees? What's it smell like? You know, I don't know, just like all these sort of like more like tapping into all your other senses when you write something. Anyway, just rambling.
So I've always known you as a grown-up romance writer, and come to find out you do these graphic novels. Do you think you'll ever do a romance graphic novel?
I don't know. That would be a nice crossover. Funny thing is, I did a long running comic called Jane's World. And it was, the premise was that Jane, the main character, was completely unlucky at love. Like, so the whole premise of the comic was failed dating attempts, like failed dating relationships, dating the wrong girl, you know, just lots of romantic hijinks that never amounted to anything permanent. So it's kind of funny that then I would sort of transition and write romance novels where people actually do meet and fall in love because my character in my comic could never pull it off. Most of the other kids comics I do have animal characters. The main characters are animals, and they're for younger readers. So not much romance happening there.
What age group do you write for?
Usually 5 to 8. 5 to 8. The most recent series is from Penguin. It's called Peanut Butter and Crackers, and it's about 2 dogs and a cat. And it's basically an adult cat and dog who suddenly their house is invaded by a puppy. So it's sort of a story about siblings. It's sort of a story about chosen families and finding your family. It's a lot about empathy. Yeah. It's because this little puppy is like a rescue and he gets taken in and they're like, what? He's like ruined our lives, you know? The first book is called Puppy Problems. Yeah. Somebody's asking if I went to art school. I went to the University of Tennessee and majored in illustration. That was what I got my degree in. And it wasn't until I started working for newspapers. I worked for newspapers for about 12 years. That was kind of my first career, that I actually did writing and learned to sort of write in a journalistic style. I learned on the job, basically. But yeah, most of my training was in art. Journalism's a great jumping off place for art or writing, I think. Actually, learned a lot of good skills in journalism.
Yeah. Thanks for that question, Bonnie. We just have a few more minutes. So anybody who wants to jump in now and ask any questions, now's your opportunity. So what else, Missouri, do you think that we should know about you or your books?
I'm putting the title of the kids' book in there just so anybody wants to look it
Thank
up.
you.
Peanut Butter and Crackers, Puppy Problems. That's the first one.
We'll look for that in
Um,
the library too.
yeah. Oh man, what else? Well, I don't know if there's aspiring writers listening, but I'm always really interested in people's process, how they write. And I know some writers that I've talked to are very organized and they have a very firm outline and they know exactly what's going to happen the minute they start writing a book. And I start writing a book and I have no idea how it's going to end. I'm completely by the seat of my pants, kind of. I usually do what I call a story map. So it's basically I get a long horizontal piece of paper and on it I do plot points for the story. So it's sort of like the emotional topography of where the story is going to go. Like I know there's going to be a high point here and a low point there and a high point here and a because that's what you want in a story, right? You want something like to build you up and then, let you, you know what I mean? You want that sort of ebb and flow of emotion in a story. Um, and I know some people write plot driven stories, maybe concept stories. All my stories start with a character. Like I hear this character talking in my head. I can feel them. I feel like what their personality's like. So they all start with character, and then the character sort of slowly reveals themselves to you over the course of the story once you put them in a context. And I usually know about 50% into a story. I do know what's going to happen, but it's this slow reveal process between the characters that sort of illuminates the path, I guess, for lack of a better way to say it.
You can really tell that in the Mandolin Lunch, in your most recent book, because it's so character driven. It's really so much from perspective of the characters and the emotions of the characters. It's there's a little bit of stuff happens, but mostly we're very engaged with the characters. So I really love that about the Mandolin Lunch.
Oh, thank you. I had as it turned out, I wanted one of the characters to be a single mom, but I don't have kids, so I don't really know what it's like to be a single mom. I can imagine what that would be like. But as luck would have it, I was doing a retreat up in Vermont, and I stayed with a friend of mine who is a single mom, and she had a friend who was visiting who was also a single mom, and I just started asking them questions sitting on the porch about what it's like to date and be a single mom. And oh man, it was the best conversation. And I think it made the book even stronger because I was able to sort of capture some of that authentic experience for that character in the story.
It felt very authentic. As a mom, I can tell you that. So if you're a mom out there, you should read this book and you will see yourself, believe me. Okay, well, that's about the time that we have. So Missouri, I want to thank you so much for being here with us tonight. And I just want to tell you, your books are really inspiring and romantic, and I thank you for writing them.
Thank you so much. That means a lot.
And for everyone who attended, thanks for your participation. Everyone who asked a question, it's appreciated. Please join us again. The next Writers Live is March 23rd at 6:30, featuring Siobhan Bantwell. And I just want to say, everyone, have a good evening and stay safe. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.